If we admit our struggles, then we somehow think of ourselves as less of a follower of Christ. But that isn't the case. If we look at the Psalms, we find the psalmist is very, very honest. Very honest about calling out to God in their despair. And even though they're struggling, they also call out to God in their faith. The second thing I want you to see in this psalm is that as the writer is honest with God about his pain, he also remembers God's faithfulness in earlier times. Verse 2 says, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. And then in verse 3 he says, yet you are the Holy One. Verse 4, you are the one on whom our forefathers put their trust. Verse 5, they trusted you and they were not disappointed. Verse 6, he goes back to his depression and despair again. He says, I am a worm and despised by others. Then in verse 9, he balances that with a statement of confidence and faith. You brought me out of the womb and cared for me even at my mother's breast. Verse 14, he's back to his depression and despair. I'm poured out like water. Have you ever felt that way? That your life has just been poured out and you're an empty bucket. My life has been poured out like water. And he says, my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax and is melted within me. I feel so parched that my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. The psalmist talks about his desperation. He talks about his sadness. He talks about his depression. And yet he also balances that with remembrances of God's faithfulness. In verse 19, he says, but you, O Lord, are my strength. Even in the struggles, the psalmist recognizes that his life is not void of faith. Even in the midst of struggles, he hasn't left God and God hasn't left him. The third thing that I want you to see in this psalm is the importance of friends and family. The psalmist declares in verse 22, I will declare your name to my brothers in the congregation. In other words, I will find strength as I talk with other believers. I will find strength as I confide in others. When we're struggling with depression, we're not seeing things clearly, and we often need a perspective that someone else can give us. Someone else can clarify. When we have a friend or a family member who is depressed, they probably don't need for us to tell them, well, why don't you just get over it? Why don't you just kind of suck it up and move on? Why don't you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and think about life in a more positive way? When someone's dealing with depression, if it were only that easy, they would do it. And so, because getting out of a depression is very difficult, that type of advice is often not very helpful. As a friend or as a concerned person in their life, we need to give them a listening ear. And in discussing this topic a little bit in the last couple of weeks with Rick Russell, we were talking about the importance of listening, and he said that the goal of a listener is to make sure that the other person knows that you understand. Often when we're listening to someone, we're thinking, okay, now what can I say that will tell them what to do to get their life back on track? But when we're listening, maybe the most important thing we can reflect to them is that we truly do hear, we truly do understand what they're going through. And then that old saying may kick in that no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. That may apply in this situation. As a friend, as a loved one, if this depression is prolonged or unexplained, encourage that person to seek professional help, to get that that professional help from a medical doctor or from a professional counselor. Most people are not hesitant to go to a doctor when they have chest pains, but yet for some reason we're hesitant to get help when we're experiencing emotional pain that seems to be prolonged. In my seminary education, I sat through lots of lectures. I read thousands of pages each semester, and that seminary education prepared me for ministry and shaped me in many ways. But there is very little about my seminary education that I can quote for you. But I do remember something from a pastoral counseling class. And Dr. David Siemens was the professor. And what he said to us one day in class was that all truth is God's truth. If something is true, whether it's been discovered by a Christian or a non-Christian, it's still true. Because all truth is God's truth. God is the creator. God is the organizer of this universe. And so any truth that is revealed, any truth that is understood, any truth that is discovered is a part of discovering God's truth. And so we live in a day, we live in a generation in which God has revealed truth to doctors and to scientists and to counselors that can help us get through depressions, can get us through difficult times. And because the truth that has been revealed to them is God's truth, then there is nothing wrong with us embracing that truth and seeking to use it in our lives to get better. Generations gone by did not have the same advantage. Generations gone by did not have the same level of understanding that had been revealed. And so we are privileged, and it's okay to use their knowledge, to use their experience to help get us through difficult times. Some of you are saying, well, what are signs of depression? Well, the classic signs of depression include a loss of joy in life. Things that you once enjoyed no longer seem to bring any joy, don't bring any sense of happiness or encouragement. There's a sense of hopelessness or uselessness. There's nothing to look forward to. You're encompassed by sadness and you just can't seem to get your mind off of it. Or maybe you have a loss of appetite, maybe a loss of sleep and energy. Maybe you have a reduced ability to concentrate. When these things happen, not only do they affect you, but they also affect your relationships. They affect your family, those in your household. They affect your friends, your colleagues. They affect your work. They affect how you perform in school. It even affects your ability to do everyday tasks. Now, there's some of you sitting here right now that you're thinking, oh, he's speaking right to me. Well, it's the Holy Spirit that's saying to you, this is something you need to listen. You've been discouraged, you've been depressed long enough that maybe you need to take some steps to get some help to try and get beyond that depression or that discouragement. There are others of you in here right now who are thinking or trying to rationalize why I'm not talking to you. The Holy Spirit is saying, you need to hear this, you need to respond, but you're saying, oh, no, it doesn't apply to me. I'm not bad enough. I've not struggled with this long enough. And if you're going through that mental exercise of trying to justify why you don't need to turn to someone to get help with the discouragement you've been feeling, you probably are in need more than anyone else to get help with the discouragement you've been feeling. That's a battle that often rages in us.